Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. June is about ready to blossom, but not before I handle some business on my end as I prep you for what is taking place and what lies ahead in the world of sports, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, as June is just a couple days away and we get ready to usher in another month, we're just about ready to close out the conference finals in both the NBA and NHL. NHL is exciting as can be right now with both series even at 2. And you already had one team in the NBA punch their ticket to the NBA finals, that being the Boston Celtics. And we'll get to them in a bit, but I'll start off with what's happening with the Minnesota Timberwolves and Dallas Mavericks, because is it quite possible that this series could turn a little bit, not necessarily on a dime, but maybe on a rusty penny? I jest, but for the T-Wolves, who were able to get out of Dallas with a win, and interestingly enough, with the way the series has gone, we know that the Mavericks have been clutch and have been able to close out these games, whether it's games 2, games 3, but game 4, where they could not seal the deal to get themselves a sweep and join the Celtics as far as being a part of the finals party. The T-Wolves did show you something. They showed you some guts. They showed you some gumption. And Karl-Anthony Towns, a guy who had been awful, especially in the last couple of games leading into game 4, finally showed his mettle and was able to shoot from behind the three-point arc. Had 25 points in the game, 20 in the second half, making 4 threes, played inside out as opposed to outside in. And even though he fouled out in the game, which is his Achilles, but the Timberwolves, again, down the stretch, and even after a miraculous 3 made by Luka Doncic, where he was fouled by Anthony Edwards, and I thought at that moment, at 103.97, which, what was it, about 15 seconds to go, and granted it was 15 seconds, but for Luka to get fouled and to throw up a desperation 3 that went in, and Edwards, I know, was despondent looking around, he couldn't believe it, and if Luka would have cut that to 103-101, that certainly would have been a game to say the least. And who knows, it would have sucked the life out of the T-Wolves, but thanks to Chris Finch, he called a timeout there, drew up a play, and after Luka Doncic missed the free throw that would have made it a 2-point game, the inbounds to Naz Reid literally a second after that miraculous 3, and although it didn't take a lot of time off the clock, but for Naz Reid to get that put back, it seemed like a bunny layup. And for the Timberwolves to make it 105-100, and that was the final score, I tell you, if you're the T-Wolves, all you do is just wipe your brow, say, whew, and get out of there with a victory. Hopefully they don't call it back. And now they've added a little bit of intrigue to the series, because think about this. Last year at this time, the Boston Celtics were going exactly through what the Timberwolves had gone, where they were the favorites. They were a slight favorite at this case, but when the Timberwolves had the home court, and we know that they lost the first 2 games, lost the game 3, they're similar to the Celtics last year, where they lost the first 2 games in their building, losing a game 3 in Miami before winning a game 4, and then we know what happened after that. They did push it to a game 7. Granted that they did lose the series, even on their home floor, but maybe they could have the same blueprint with a different result, and there's still miles to go before they even get there. But now that Game 5 is in their building, perhaps they could play with a little bit of fervor, have the home crowd behind them, know that they have some life in the series, and maybe somehow, some way, get to Dallas with a 3-2 series deficit and maybe push the series back for a Game 7. Now, you know the NBA, they are praying for that. And as it was, talking about it last week and even on Monday, when the finals looked like there was going to be a 9-day layoff if the Mavericks would have pulled that game out on Tuesday night, but as it is, not the case, and who knows, if the Mavericks win tonight, all right, a week isn't that bad. It's still going to be a semi-eternity between now and then, but at least you can deal with it, because once you get past the night, if the Mavericks do win, and you get through the weekend, Monday you can start talking about the series, and then Still have 3 days before you even get to game 1, I understand. But if the suits and the powers that be down on Fifth Avenue in the NBA headquarters, I know that they're hoping for the T-Wolves to at least win the night. So you get the Saturday night, and then if by all means the Mavericks win game 6 in their building, then at least you can go into the early part of next week, start talking about the series, and have a 5-day layoff as opposed to a 7-day layoff if the Mavericks were to win this evening. Now, as far as the series and how I look at it, I hope there's going to be some length, and not because I'm a Celtic fan, hoping that they go to a 7th game and knock down, drag out, let them expend all their energy, because they'll still have a few days off before they fly to Boston, whether that be the Mavericks or the Timberwolves. But I think the T-Wolves are a live wolf, no pun intended here, because you would think that from what they learned in the previous series, being up 2-0 to the Denver Nuggets, and then they, of course, lost the 3 middle games before having to win a game 6 and game 7 in Denver. And you would think a little bit of that experience. Now, I understand you'd flip it because they only trailed 3-2 when they had to go back home to win in a 45-point blowout against the defending champs. But how I look at it is that the T-Wolves, now that they're cooking with gas, I would look at this from a standpoint of try to, if they could, blow out the Mavericks, put the proverbial foot on their necks early, similar to what they did in a game 6 against the Denver Nuggets, and try to beef them in front throughout the whole night. Get that rocking chair game. I'm not trying to say to blow them out, a 121-95 type game. I'm sure the T-Wolves and their, of course, players and fans would like that. But even if they win a comfortable 12 to 15 point win, to put a little bit of doubt in the Dallas Mavericks' head, and even though that they're going to go back home to play in a game 6, but now all the pressure will be square on the Mavericks if the T-Wolves, now I get it, if they win a nail-biter tonight, the Mavericks will still feel a little bit good about themselves, even though now it went from 3-0 to 3-2. But if you really go out there and take them to the back of the woodshed, if you're the Timberwolves, maybe you could plant a little seed of doubt in the Mavericks' head, so where the pressure will squarely be on them come game 6 to not have to get on a plane to go back to Minnesota for deciding game 7 and maybe just be a part of NBA history that the Celtics were unable to do a year ago. That's how I look at it. And I think the T-Wolves will win tonight. How they will win, I don't know. I don't know if Anthony Edwards is going to go off or Karl Anthony Towns is going to piggyback what he did in game 4 into game 5. It's all a coin flip. Who knows what's going to happen here? Even give it up to Mike Conley, who had 14 and 7 the other day, contributed in his veteran leadership, 17 years in the league, as we all know. But I would think that if the T-Wolves win a rocking chair type of game, I think that's going to bode well for them going into game 6, more so than if it's another tooth and nail, down to the wire, and if the T-Wolves do pull it out, then the Mavericks will go home saying, all right, we lost another tough game, but now we're going home. We know we can beat this team. We've beaten this team, obviously, 3 times in the series and in our building in game 3. And I don't think it erases all of the doubt that the Mavericks would have if the Timberwolves go in there and just blast them from start to finish. But that's the beauty of sports. We'll wait to see what's going to happen tonight. Hopefully they do push it to a game 6. I would love to see that. And I think that even if it does go to a game 6, can the T-Wolves win? Of course they can. Will they? I would be surprised. Now, I would love to see a possible chance at history to see a game 7, which would be on Monday. But I think the Dallas Mavericks will win a game 6. I don't think they'll win the night. I think they can win, of course. But I think it will go to a 6th game. And I think Luka and Kyrie, they'll rally the troops. They'll make sure that there's no way we're going to go back to Minnesota to even give them an iota of life as they already have given them at this very moment. So I would think that once they get to game 6, it's going to be a different story. And we got to wait to see what's going to happen with Derek Lively. Remember, he got hit in the back of the head in game 3. Did not play in game 4. Who knows what the status will be for a game 5 tonight. But we know Lively is a guy that is his last name. Lively defensively on the boards, contributes in so many ways that you would definitely need in order for you to get to an NBA final. So we'll have to wait and see what his status will be as the game number 5 in Minnesota will take place this evening. And as far as the Celtics and Pacers, Another meltdown by the Pacers in the waning moments. They didn't score a basket in the final 3 minutes and 33 seconds of the game, or even score a point for that matter. And I believe it was a basket. It was 105-102. In fact, I don't think they even scored a point. And I should know that just going off the top of my head, freestyle, but I know it was 98-90 with 5 minutes to go. And yes, those final 3.5 minutes, they did not score a point, where the Celtics, and even in surprising fashion, and I got to say this because the Celtics, as I talked about at the start of the playoffs, obviously I didn't trust them. I didn't know what to expect, whether or not they were going to carry everything that happened in the regular season. And mind you, over the course of the final few weeks where they wrapped up the 1 seed in the conference and pretty much had nothing to play for over the last maybe even month of the season, how they were going to start the engines up and get themselves off and running to see whether or not that they were going to carry whatever they did in the regular season into the postseason. And they've certainly done that. And even in clutch moments, and I get it, you could fault the Pacers a little bit for that, especially in game 1 with the errors, inbounds passes off of Pascal Siakam, going out of bounds, the Jaylen Brown 3 in the corner, which was pretty much, when you think about it, that set the tone for the whole series, knowing that the Celtics made plays down the stretch, coming from behind, big deficits, just like I mentioned, 98-90 with 5 minutes to go. Game 3, they were down 18 in the second half, in the third quarter in particular, and I get it that the big leads no longer mean anything because anybody seems to come back from these big deficits, whether it's by 10, 18, 31, as we saw with the Clippers and Mavericks in the first round. So for game number 4 in particular, the Celtics were able to just make the key plays when necessary, whether it was Jaylen Brown, who ended up being the conference final MVP, and they had to thwart the backcourt, in particular, Andrew Nembhard, who was looking like Gabe Vincent 2.0. And if the Celtic fan knows Gabe Vincent over the last 2 years when he was a member of the Miami Heat. But it's a good sign for this team to win these games, even though they're not against a seasoned veteran team or a team that knows their way around the postseason. And of course, with them being compromised with Tyrese Halliburton out with that hamstring. But the Celtics certainly were able to put together big stretches here down the stretch of these games to where they were able to come out on top, get big buckets. Obviously, at 102 up, Jaylen Brown, who looked like he was about to fumble, bumble, and stumble and turn the ball over, throws it to the corner. Derek White gets the 3, which ices the game 105-102, and the Celtics win another Eastern Conference championship, similar to what they did on the road 2 years ago in a Game 7 against the Miami Heat. And just like we talked about at the beginning of the postseason, knowing that the Celtics, with their big record and everything that had transpired throughout the course of the year, here they are as the last team standing in the East, and their record 12-2 so far in this postseason. And a lot of people are trying to compare it to postseasons of the past. I don't want to hear it. Let them win 4 more games before we can even compare them. And they're not an all-time great team. So even if somehow, some way, they end up 16-4 and win the next series 4-2, that will equal exactly what the Denver Nuggets did last year. Now, the Nuggets, are they considered an all-time great team considering what they did in the postseason last year? I'm not going to say that. But it's interesting because there could be some similarities between last year with the conference final into the NBA final and this year. Of course, I already talked about how the Celtics had to dig out of a 3-0 hole, which they did, and then lost a Game 7 in their building. Could the same happen in this series where obviously not only the Timberwolves are looking to match what the Celtics did last year and hopefully win the series, but remember, last year the Denver Nuggets swept the LA Lakers in the conference final to where they had to wait 10 days before they played their next game. Because if you recall, they won a game number 4 on a Monday, I believe, and they had to wait till the following Thursday in order for them to get themselves ready and shake off whatever rust that they had to play the Miami Heat. And now you're going to have possibly a same scenario where the Celtics clinched on Monday, and if the series does go 7 games, they may have a scenario, and it doesn't even matter, because come to think of it, it could go 7 games or it could end up in 5 tonight. The Celtics will still have a 10-day layoff. But the parallels of last year, if the T-Wolves do push it to a 7-game and win the next 2, it'll be a carbon copy of what we saw there last year. But the Celtics, give it up. A phenomenal run here to get to this point. They're going to be big favorites, whether it is against Dallas or Minnesota, it doesn't matter. And all I'm hoping for is that competitive game tonight, maybe a game 6 there on Saturday. And if the series does conclude then come Monday, we will talk about quite possibly an NBA Finals preview, which I won't really get into the weeds on that. I'll wait till next Thursday since the Finals will commence then. But if the Western Conference Finals is put to rest by the time we get to Monday's podcast, obviously we'll recap that as well as some storylines, and there'll be a plenty, especially if it's Boston-Dallas. But even if the T-Wolves do happen to make it to a final, or we'll actually talk about a Game 7 that night because it will take place the next time we reconnect if the T-Wolves do run the table here. So that's what I have with the NBA. Let's see what's going to happen here over the course of tonight and maybe even into the weekend. And now as I lace up my skates and get to the NHL, and you're going to have a compelling Eastern and Western Conference final here, and I'll start with tonight's game with the Rangers. And I understand the Oilers last night. I'm going to get to them, but more for Florida and the Rangers. And I said this from the outset, that this series was going to be a wild one. And what we've seen so far to this point, I get it, game 1, 3-0. And even though it was 1-0 late until Alexis Lafreniere scored a goal into his own net, and then they added an empty netter, since then you've had nothing but overtime games. And on Monday we talked about how the Rangers were able to win the 2 games, whether it was Friday night and then Sunday in Florida, to get themselves up 2-1 in the series. And then on Tuesday night, you had the Panthers who scored the opening goal, and then the Rangers, I had it in reverse. Rangers got out to a lead. Then the Panthers got the next 2 goals to make it 2-1. Then Alexis Lafreniere gets that beautiful goal there to tie the game early in the third period. And then you thought to yourself, well, the next goal is going to be crucial because whether it be in regulation, obviously, or if it does go into overtime, even quite more obviously, that whomever was going to get that next goal, especially in the third period, the likelihood of them winning that game was going to be enormous. But for the Panthers, they were able to scratch and claw and put as much pressure as they quite possibly could have ever done. When you look at the onslaught that they had, the Rangers that is, or the Panthers that is, when they just were relentless attacking the net. They stood in the Rangers zone, it seemed like the whole third period after Lafreniere scored that goal. And they were just wave after wave, relentless, just trying to pound on Igor Shesterkin. They weren't able to get the go-ahead goal. They went into overtime. And then literally a minute into the overtime, Mika Zibanejad with a terrible turnover, and I'll get to him in a minute. Terrible turnover, which led to a penalty. And then just 13 seconds later, Sam Reinhart in the slot goes top shelf on Shesterkin, and the Panthers tie the series there at 2, and now set up a pivotal Game 5 tonight at Madison Square Garden, which I'll get to in a minute. But as far as the Rangers go, they have now got the game that they needed. Of course, we talked about it in Game 3, and now all the pressure's on the Rangers. And even though the Panthers, they have been probably the better team here in this series overall, you could talk about them being deadlocked. It's going to be, and has been so far, a classic series when you have 3 overtime games, and I would not expect it to be anything less than that from here on out. And you could predict, however this series may unfold, it could be Rangers in 6, Panthers in 6, Rangers in 7, or Panthers in 7. You choose. I think it's going to be any one of those combinations, and obviously that's going to be the case. But if you told me right now, oh, the Rangers are going to win in 6, which I said at the beginning of this round, I wouldn't be shocked. Or even if the Panthers win the next 2 games, I wouldn't be shocked. Or let's say even if the Panthers win the night, Rangers win down there, and if the Panthers win a Game 7 coming back here, I wouldn't be shocked either. Because we know the Panthers have played well on the road here throughout the past 2 years during their Stanley Cup run last year and then obviously this year. So nothing is off the table when it comes to who's going to come out on top here. And I couldn't even tell you. Like I said, Rangers in 6. I'm going to stick with that. A little bit of reverse jinx maybe, depending on who's listening to this, especially the Ranger fan out there. But I can't tell you. I wouldn't be surprised if we get another overtime game in the series. I know it's going to be down to the wire. I wouldn't expect to see any blowouts. I would expect it to be close from here on out. And this is what's the beauty of Stanley Cup playoff hockey, when you have two teams that are just about their equal, battle it out, and let's see if it's going to be pushed to a seventh game. And mind you, Game 7 would be Monday night, because you have tonight, then you'll have Saturday night in Florida, and then Monday would be a Game 7, which we would preview if that's going to be the case. Now, as far as the Rangers go, you have to wonder whether or not Mika Zibanejad and even Chris Kreider, two guys that are big-time players, focal points of their team, they have done absolutely zilch in this series. And what I mean by that, they have not scored a goal, registered an assist, and recorded a point. So those two guys, I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of pressure on them to try to produce here and take their team to the promised land to get to a Stanley Cup, because without those two guys, and even Artemi Panarin and Lafreniere, he's been phenomenal here in this postseason. I'm sure you saw the stat there the other night, where in his first couple of seasons in the postseason, he done absolutely nothing. What, he had 2 goals, 7 assists, and since then, in this postseason, he has been more than rock solid. So I'm sure Lafreniere, Vincent Trocheck, who's had a big-time playoff, but they're going to need Panarin and especially Zibanejad and Kreider to wake up here if the Rangers have any shot to advance in the next round. And in Florida, they've been able to just play well here. Bobrovsky, as we all know, in net, trying to match what Igor Shesterkin has done. And you've had your contributions, whether it is Sam Reinhart, the Sam Bennett's of the world. But Carter Verghege, let's see if he could now, as you get deeper into the series, step up in class as he's done so in the past. So it is going to be phenomenal. I'm looking forward to tonight's game, which is going to be interesting. But again, just because whomever comes out on top tonight, to me, there's no guarantee, because I wouldn't be surprised if whomever wins tonight, they lose the next 2. So, you know, we will be on top of that as we get deeper into the series. And then in the Western Conference, I said this before last Monday's podcast, before Game 7 between Edmonton and Vancouver. Will the real Edmonton Oilers please stand up? And when you look at Games 3 and 4 in Edmonton, after winning Game 1 and having a series where they went back home, tied at 1, and I thought that they had to win one of the next 2 in order for them to not only, of course, be in the series, but to get to a Stanley Cup. And what happens? Game 3, they get off to a 2-0 lead. You're thinking, all right, great, everything's fine, dandy. But what happens? The Stars come back with 3 goals of their own, 2 by Jason Robertson, before getting a goal at the end of the second period to tie the game. But then Jason Robertson gets the hat trick in the third period, about almost 12 minutes in, and then they tack on an empty netter. They lose 5-3, and then you think to yourself, all right, 2-0. They gave up the 3 goals. They tied it, but they weren't able to get that go-ahead goal or get themselves in position where they can win a Game 3. And now it has you thinking, all right, will Edmonton come out alive here in a game number 4? And then last night, they go down 2-0, and you think to yourself, oh, geez, here we go. Edmonton now is probably going to lay a big, giant egg here, but they scored 2 goals in the latter part of the first period, and then from that point on, they cruised to a 5-2 victory. You had Leon Draisaitl in a span of 51 seconds where, not Mattias Ekholm, not the defenseman, but you had Matthias Janmark score a shorthanded goal to take the lead, and then 51 seconds later, Leon Draisaitl gets another goal to add to that lead to make it 4-2. They get an empty netter there late, and now Edmonton is back in the series. So they go back to Dallas tied at 2, and how I look at this series, I said the Stars are going to win in 6. I hope Edmonton pushes them to a 7th game. I hope Edmonton even wins the series. I think the NHL would rather see Edmonton there with their star power, and we know who the cast of characters are there. But Dallas, you got to give it up. They are a resilient bunch. They're a team that has maybe even created their own messes, dating back to the opening series against Vegas when they were down 0-2 before coming back to win that series. And now here they are. An opportunity for them. They get up 2-0, and you think, all right, well, Dallas, maybe they'll continue to play their style, try to tack on another goal. They didn't do so. Edmonton gets those 2 goals at the latter part of the first period, and the next thing you know, the Edmonton Oilers end up with a rocking chair 5-2 win, and makes you think and even doubt whether or not Dallas is going to be able to put away the Oilers. Now, the Oilers at this point, I get it, house money, but when you get to this point of the series, and almost similar to the Panther-Ranger series, Would you be shocked if Edmonton won Game 5 and then Dallas wins the next 2 games? Absolutely not. Would you be surprised if Dallas wins a game number 5 in their building, go to Edmonton and lose Game 6 before having to come back home for Game 7? Absolutely not. And we all know Game 7s are coin flips. Bounce of the puck, penalties, etc. You just never know. So the Stars, as you get deeper into this series, all the pressure is going to be on them. But if Edmonton does win a Game 5, and it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, they would have to seal the deal, because I don't know if they'd win a Game 7. Now, with the way hockey's been, watch them win Game 5 and then have to go back to Dallas because of a loss in Game 6 and then win a Game 7. I think that's going to be a tall order, if you ask me, because I don't trust Edmonton. Again, which Edmonton team is going to stand up and which is the real Edmonton Oilers team? But one more time, this is the beauty of Stanley Cup playoff hockey. I wish it could be more physical, as we know. I wish it could be a scenario where we would have a lot more physicality and a lot more of some rougher play. But again, I digress. I think Stars in 6 when it's all said and done. But all those scenarios that I detailed, I would not be surprised. I really wouldn't. And one more time, if Edmonton does win a Game 5, I wouldn't be surprised if then Dallas wins the next 2. Now, the only thing I would be surprised if Edmonton does win Games 5 and 6. I'd be shocked. Because unlike the Ranger-Panther series, where the Rangers or Panthers can win Games 5 and 6, there'd be no surprise there. That is the one angle that I would be not only just shocked, I'd be flabbergasted. And it's not a knock on Edmonton. It's just because of their unpredictability. You don't know which team is going to show up on any given night. So if they were to win both of those games back to back, and in essence, they would win the last 3 games of the series, that would be something that no one would have ever predicted. So that's what I have there with the NHL. Certainly looking forward to what's going to take place there, NBA, etc., as we'll recap it all there come Monday's podcast. Now as I pivot and turn my attention to Major League Baseball, and fasten your seatbelts, people, because I started to talk about the Mets on Monday, and I'm going to save that for in a couple minutes. But I started getting to them, but then I got off of them because I didn't want to be that guy that's going to rant and rave. And even though we were at Memorial Day, and I said, I started to go there, and I did unpack a little bit of that. Well, now it is going to be put to rest, but I'm going to leave the suspense for a couple of minutes to get to some other baseball notes. The first thing that needs to be brought up is that Major League Baseball has now brought on all the stats of the Negro Leagues and will be a part of the discussion when it comes to what was done, especially in particular when you look at someone like Josh Gibson, a guy who was called the Black Babe Ruth, a guy who batted .372 one year, which now supersedes what Ty Cobb did. I'd have to go back and check what year, but he batted .367 one year, which was, or I should say for a career, not for 1 year, and I'm going to get to the 1 year in a second. The career batting average was .372 for Josh Gibson, .367 for Ty Cobb. So now Gibson is in the MLB record books for the highest career batting average, and that speaks volumes. Because Ty Cobb, when you're .367, and we know Ty Cobb is one of the pillars of Major League Baseball, and is pre-Babe Ruth when you think about it. But also, he holds the career high for batting average in a season where he batted .466 one year. And as we all know, Rogers Hornsby 1 year batted .424, and there's been a few others that have batted .400. And I have to go back and check to see when Josh Gibson did that. But as we all know, the last batter to hit .400 in Major League Baseball was Ted Williams at .406, and I believe that was in '51. Now, I don't know when Gibson did that. And, of course, at that time, that's when Jackie Robinson was already a part of the Major Leagues. So even if Gibson, and I have to, again, do a little bit more research on the Negro Leagues as to when that ended, but we all know Josh Gibson batted based on the 1 year .466. So that trumps anything that a lot of the players that we know of the past, whether your name is Rogers Hornsby or even Ted Williams for that matter. So a lot of people may look at that and say, well, they shouldn't be part of the Major League Baseball records because that was the Negro Leagues. But what are they supposed to do? It wasn't their fault that the commissioner at the time, Kennesaw Martin Landis, did not want to integrate and have the players such as Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, among the like, to be a part of the major leagues. And of course, you have to thank Branch Rickey, who was the GM of the Brooklyn Dodgers and of course their owner, and having Jackie Robinson break the color barrier when it comes to not only just baseball, but sports overall. And we understand everything of what Jackie Robinson meant, not only just to baseball, but just to America in that era dating back to the 40s. So how can you fault those guys that played in the Negro Leagues because they couldn't play in Major League Baseball? And even though you had the barnstorming teams of Ruth and Gehrig where they played against the Negro Leagues at that time and were part of that tour, and unfortunately they were not part of the Major League Baseball landscape, but for the MLB to do that and include the records obviously was long overdue. And for those who are going to shun or put, different sport of course, a stiff arm to that, there wasn't anything that the Negro Leagues could do based on the behavior of what Major League Baseball had done throughout the 20s, 30s, and 40s before Jackie Robinson became a part of history. So I don't want to hear it. I don't want people to all of a sudden think that, this shouldn't be a part of the record books. This isn't ABA, NBA, people. This isn't anything like that. And as it is, different Hall of Fame, different set of encyclopedias altogether, but you cannot compare a league that was not included to where a league that was separate in the ABA from the NBA. So I get it that the major league players did not play against one another, and there could be a lot of dispute over whether or not that records prior to Jackie Robinson, so that means whatever Babe Ruth did, or Lou Gehrig, or Hank Greenberg, or players, to even Ty Cobb for that matter, what they did prior to 1947 shouldn't count. Well, that shouldn't be the case, and we all know that that counts. Well, guess what? The same should be included, because since the Negro Leagues weren't a part of the Major League Baseball because of all the red tape that the commissioner and what Major League Baseball thought and felt at that time, obviously very archaic and certainly wrong in so many ways and shapes and forms, but for the Negro Leagues to have their statistics included now in Major League Baseball, kudos. And you're just going to have to live and deal with it. So if that meant that Josh Gibson, who may have hit 800 home runs, and I don't know what the tally was, it's anywhere possibly between 780 to even over 800 home runs, well, I'm sure that the historians and I'm sure a lot of the researchers are probably trying to put all that together. With this being a work in progress, not necessarily just recently, but over the years, then maybe we could have a count. And I know it may be difficult, and it probably will be difficult, but this is going to be an extensive search, I would think. And one more time, if that means Josh Gibson has the all-time career 372, and we know that baseball, you're not going to have a hitter come anywhere close to that as far as a lifetime batting average. So the record is what the record is. Nobody was going to touch Ty Cobb, and 5 points ahead of him was Josh Gibson. Nobody's going to touch that either. So you know what? Might as well put it in the record books for Major League Baseball, and that's it. Because that part of baseball, which was important and imperative, and the players that were a part of that, they need to be addressed. And I get it. It's posthumously, it's decades and decades ago and generations ago that people can't even begin to comprehend. But we can comprehend and know that with those records being included, it's great to see. And they were a part of baseball. I understand not Major League Baseball history, but it was a part of baseball history and even American baseball history. So guess what? If you don't like it, tough. But congratulations for now the Negro Leagues and their statistics being a part of Major League Baseball. Now, as far as what's happening in the sport overall, I know you had that weird scenario again. Here it is twice in a week where you had the interference call where it ended up being a double play last night in that Yankee-Angel game. And remember last Thursday, where the Orioles were in Chicago to play the White Sox, but that actually ended the game to where Gunnar Henderson supposedly was interfered by Andrew Vaughn on the base paths, to where the umpire called Vaughn automatically out. And that was another scenario where it was an infield fly rule. So right away, the bat is automatically out. So even if Henderson just let the ball go and let it drop, the base runners could just stay put and that's it. But no, because there was interference, and there wasn't any interference because Vaughn didn't see Henderson and Henderson didn't see Vaughn. So for the umpire to prematurely just say, up, game over, double play, had everybody up in arms. Where last night in the first inning, bases loaded, where Giancarlo Stanton, it's a pop-up to second base, but the shortstop, Zach Neto, comes over to try to make a play on it. But Soto, for whatever the reason, and again, infield fly rule, so he should have gotten back to the bag right away. And even though he didn't intentionally get in the way, but it just so happened as where the ball was landing near the second base bag, and Neto, although he misplayed it big time, but maybe hearing footsteps or knowing that Soto was in the vicinity, distracted him and didn't fully concentrate on the play. But where Soto tried to get to the bag, he actually grazed Neto, so therefore interfered with the shortstop, and therefore it was a double play. Aaron Boone came out, no shocker, was ejected from the game, but even in the post-game interview, he did say that by lay of the law, that was probably the right call. And I get it, he was sticking up for his players, and that's typical Boone, so even though he probably felt that that was the right call, but he couldn't stay quiet, he didn't want to not have Soto be a guy that was going to stick up for him, and where Soto looks in the dugout, it's like, hey, are you going to do anything about it? So, of course, Boone went out there, got ejected, typical Boone fashion. But how I looked at it was, if it was a call infield fly where the batter's automatically out, what is Soto doing trying to hang around the bag as a little bit of gamesmanship? All right, fine. But therefore interfered with Neto on that play, and that call should have been made. So unlike what we saw last Thursday, that was a call that was right, and no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. Should have been called where Soto was out, and therefore the next play, I believe, was a ground out. So the Yankees did not score a run there where they had a big threat, bases loaded, nobody out in the first inning, and they did win 2-1 to take the second game of that series, the third game today, and then they go up the coast to San Francisco over the weekend as they continue their quest throughout California. But besides that, I know a lot of stuff we talked about Monday with Acuna out, and I still believe that the Braves will be in the running for a World Series, not based on what happened 3 years ago where Acuna tore his ACL on his right knee, and then they won a World Series that year. Remember, you had Freddie Freeman on the team, and that was Freeman's last year before he went back to LA. But I still believe that they're one of the top 5 teams that could get to and win a World Series, that along with the Phillies, Dodgers, Orioles, and Yankees. And since then, not much has happened there with baseball, as I'll cut right through it. Other than that, I know that the Braves had that one kid, another Spencer, in their rotation, Spencer Schwellenbach, who was brought up, and 23-year-old right-hander, who knows, maybe as the year goes on, he could take the place of Spencer Strider, his namesake, and he did pitch 88 pitches, 60 for strikes, 5 hits, 5 strikeouts, and a walk, as he left the game trailing 3-1. So he's a guy who wasn't really on my radar as far as an up-and-coming, certainly not among the ranks of a guy like Paul Skeens, but Schwellenbach, we'll get to see whether or not he's going to be the real deal somewhere down the road. As we know, the Braves have a very good farm system, as you've seen throughout the years, obviously with guys like Strider, even before him, whether Bryce Elder, Max Fried, etc. So the Braves, I think, will be fine and be one of those teams, like I said, maybe one of the last standing when it's all said and done. Now let me get right to it, people. What more can I say about this Met team? Now, I know I started with that the other day. I know I started to get into that when I talked about Lindor finally getting over the Mendoza line and talking about other different factors of this team, even Edwin Diaz for that matter. And Diaz is on the IL now with a shoulder issue, so who knows what the rest of his season is going to look like. I'm sure they probably just put him on ice. Maybe it's just nothing serious. It's just to kind of cool him off here and put him on ice to try to get whatever confidence back in him. But now let's just get right to it. It is time. It's May 30th, 2024. And just think about this, people. Let me go start off here. 2 years ago, and granted it was 2 years, I get it wasn't last year, but 2 years ago at this time, when the Mets had a 9.5 game lead, Memorial Day, and in fact on May 31st, they had a 10.5 game lead. And we know what happened from there on out throughout the summer and even into October. And here it is, this team who started off 0-5, They ended up going on a streak where they went 12-3. And think about this, how baseball, the gods, how it works mysteriously, especially when it comes to what it is that I do. The last time the Mets won a series goes back to April 19th, 20th, and 21st. They won 2 out of 3. In fact, they won the first 2 games of that series before they got blown out in the final series. I believe it was 10-0. That was to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Since then, they have gone on a 10-25 clip where over the last 3 days, they got swept by the aforementioned Dodgers. One in a doubleheader because Memorial Day got rained out. They lost in a doubleheader. They gave up leads late. And even yesterday, with the game tied at 3 in the 8th inning, where they had Jorge Lopez come in, and yes, I understand he argued a strike pitch with Shohei Ohtani at the plate, and then what happens? Ohtani took him over the fence, and then as he got pulled from the game, what did he do? He threw his glove into the stands, over the netting that protects the fans from foul balls. So it's not as if he just, out of frustration, said, whatever, a la Louis Tiant. Check that on YouTube. When he was a member of the Yankees, he threw his glove in the stands. But he literally heaved it into the crowd, and in the postgame didn't even care about it. He said, I don't care. I don't care what the Mets do. If I'm here tomorrow, or if I'm not here, I could give 2 you-know-whats. And sure enough, the Mets designated him for assignment. Carlos Mendoza in the postgame said that's unacceptable. There's no way that you could act like that on a baseball diamond, and he's 100% right. So this stretch where in 35 games they lost 25. They haven't won a series since the middle of April, and June is Saturday. They have the Diamondbacks, the defending National League champs, and not to say that they've been world beaters all year. They're coming into Citi Field for 4 games this weekend. And they already are 1-5 on this trip. And mind you, historically with this team, 2022 notwithstanding, and I mentioned this on Monday's podcast, June has been their kryptonite, has been their nemesis. And we haven't even approached June. But guess what? The Mets are a month ahead of schedule. Let me calm down here because now I'm just all over the place. Think about it, people. The Mets are a month ahead of schedule. They've had an awful May. Now they may go into June possibly worse. Now let's get to the particulars. This isn't all on Carlos Mendoza. I can't get on him, and people could say, oh, JAYREELZ, Mendoza this, Mendoza that. What's this guy to do? This guy is a puppet in the organization. Sadly, he is the Mickey Callaway a la Luis Rojas of the past 5 years. And mind you, even though Buck gave you one shining year 2 years ago, but this is the same movie we saw back in 2018, 2019, 2020. Same deal. This isn't anything that is unconventional to the Met fan. So yes, we could debate about his strategies, we could debate about certain things, but we all know this is the front office and a collective and collaborative effort when it comes to the manager and trying to figure out the game 3 hours prior to the game actually happening. So I'm not going to pin it all on Mendoza. Who I will pin it on is David Stearns and Steve Cohen for that matter. And I've talked about Cohen in the past with not being able to trust him, considering 2 years ago he was all in, bringing in Buck Showalter, bringing in all these high-priced ticket items, the Max Scherzers, and I was all for it. I even called this team the Evil Empire, bringing in Kodai Senga, bringing in Justin Verlander, bringing in all these guys. It's just like, oh my goodness, this is something that the Met fan hasn't seen. And now, Steve Cohen has gone Fred Wilpon 2.0. And I understand he wants to scale back the payroll because of the luxury tax. Obviously, he didn't think about that 2 years ago. He didn't care because he wanted to throw his new ownership and that syndrome to kind of throw his weight around to be the class of New York. And obviously, you could take the CL off. He's become, and his team has become more the ass of New York. So now you have a scenario where Stearns comes in. He's a Queens guy. I believe he's from Flushing. And all he wants to do is, yes, I get it that there's going to be a semblance of the analytics and all that, but now they're back into the bargain basement deals when it comes to bringing in players on this team that we've seen here over the course of the last 6-7 months or so. And I understand maybe not recently, but right, the Sean Manayas of the world, guys like that you're going to bring in. The Jake Diekmans coming out of the bullpen. All these guys that are literally stopgaps. And now the Mets went from going to Tiffany's to going to Kmart. And even though I was all for that, knowing that he said he was going to contend in 2025, but now you have this situation with Pete Alonso and his contract, and I'm going to say something that's, I don't think anybody has said. It's time to blow this team up. Blow it up. There are only 2 or really 3 people that I want to keep on this team. I want to keep Francisco Alvarez. I want to keep Kodai Senga, and who knows when we're going to see him. But he has 3 more years, and his contract, he signed 15 for 75. Or 5 years for 75 million, 15 a year. So I'm good with that. And you got to keep Diaz because he has 3 more years and whatever. Not including this year, but 60 million on top of whatever he's getting the rest of this year. And you can't even trade him for a bag of baseballs at this point. Those are the 3 guys I want to keep. Alonso, gone. Because he's going to want big money. He's 30 years old. And he's going to give you some power. He's going to give you production. But to me, he's not worth $250 million. The Mets should have paid him that money 2 years ago when the Mets were good, and they should have ripped up the last 2 years of his contract before he got Scott Boras as his agent, and that would have been it. You would have had him on a team-friendly contract, a la what the Braves have done. And remember, Steve Cohen said he wants to follow the blueprint of what the Braves and the Dodgers have done. Has he done that? Absolutely not. So I want Alonso gone, McNeil. I don't know what happened. 2 years ago, this guy won a batting title, and he can't hit his way out of a wet paper bag. I talked about Lindor finally getting over the Mendoza line. We still have 7 more years and 200 and some odd million left with this guy. This guy was supposed to be a top 10, top 15 player in the sport. Perennial all-star. Quite possibly an MVP candidate. He's been anything but that. And yes, he does show some pop and plays good defense, but he's batting .210. Forget about the rotation. It's in shambles. The Tyler McGills, I've seen enough. And the Dave Petersons, I understand he was game yesterday. I had enough of those guys. And I understand you have to have pitchers to start. You have to have somebody in your rotation. And with the way the Mets have been, you got to throw somebody in there. But I'm tired of seeing those guys. And I understand you're not going to have 1 through 5. This isn't going to be Matt Harvey, Noah Syndergaard, Jacob deGrom, Steven Matz. I get it. Or even before that, Doc Gooden, Sid Fernandez, Ron Darling, Bob Ojeda. I get it. But I'm tired of seeing these pitchers that could barely last into the 4th, 5th inning or get shellacked the 3rd time around the lineup. And yes, let me get back to David Stearns for a second. I'm tired of, and I get it, he has to toe the company line. We have 2 months left to the deadline, as he stated the other day in a press conference. And even though, right, the record doesn't indicate that, but we still have time, of course he's going to say that. He's not going to throw his team under the bus. But what else is he going to do? This guy, he's not going to make any major moves here. I will say this, JD Martinez is going to be gone because he can still hit. He's batting over 300. That's going to be a piece. You're not going to get much back because he's an older player and you're pretty much going to have him as a rental. It's not as if the next team is going to sign him long term. So you're going to get a marginal prospect at best back, but you know he's going to be gone by July 30th. And anybody else off the team, I don't care who you are. Starling Marte, gone. Brandon Nimmo, he's got to have to stick around too because he's still owed 6 years and $1 zillion left on his contract. And he's been a major disappointment. I don't know what happened to Nimmo this year. And those guys, you know, the Baders, the Harrison Baders of the world and the Tyrone Taylors, forget about those guys. Everybody, whomever you want, take them. Except for Alvarez, Senga, obviously not Diaz unless somebody wants to take Diaz off your hands. But again, with all that money that's coming to him, and the same for Nimmo. And nobody's going to take Lindor either. But everybody else is fair game. Blow it up. And I understand New York, you can't do that. But guess what? Start over. Why not? I can't get on Brett Beatty. He's still a young kid. I can't get on Mark Vientos. He's been up and down as far as AAA and back. Who knows? Maybe you got something with those two guys. I understand Beatty's batting 227 or whatever it is. But again, he's still a young player. I still want to see more. There's not enough there on the back of the baseball card for you to suggest that he shouldn't be on the team. But this team is a flat-out disaster. I said the other day they've dug themselves a 6-foot hole, and I said you could probably start throwing some dirt on them so they could crawl themselves out. And yes, I get it that they're still 6 games back of the last spot in the wild card in the NL, but throw dirt on them. This team is done. This team is over. This team is kaput. Hopefully, if I do talk about them again, it's not about any I don't want to say scandals, but between throwing gloves into the stands or bats or whatever else, there's nothing else to discuss about the team. Unless there's a big trade or something else that's coming down the pike where you know I'm going to have to bring it up. And I'll end the rant with this. Steve Cohen, this is to you. And David Stearns as well. If your blueprint and game plan for 2025 is to be a contender, and I understand you want to bring back the payroll a little bit, but guess what? Even with Diaz and Lindor on the payroll, making big time money, Verlander and Max Scherzer's contracts are done after this year. So you can scratch that. And a lot of the other contracts that are going to be coming off the books, I know you still have McNeil in a couple of years, but that's small peanuts. Same for Marte. Let's build this team right. Bring some free agents. You don't have to bring the high-priced free agents. Bring the guys that you know they're going to be guys that are going to want to be on this team. The glue guys. Yes, the sexy guy sounds good, but only if he fits the team. And if you don't bring Alonso back, that's fine. And there's even talk about, oh, we could trade him and bring him back. I don't want to deal with that. If you're going to trade him, bring back whatever. And even then, you may not get a lot back because his production this year has been good, it hasn't been great. And because he's going to be in a walk year, it's not as if he had 2 years left on his deal. It's not as if it was a situation where when the Padres traded for Juan Soto 2 years ago, he still had 2 years left on his contract where you're going to get a boatload of young players. Not the case here if you're Pete Alonso. So Steve Cohen, David Stearns, start building this team now. I don't care. Even if you got to trade people in the early part of June, if you're going to get a sexy deal now, do it. And I'm sure they're working the phones because this team is going nowhere in 2024. And that's all I'll say about that. All right, let me wrap up here with a couple of quickies. The tennis, Iga Światek, she had a scare there. The number one women's player in the world went up against Naomi Osaka. And you could argue whether or not Osaka deserved her in the second round. And I get it, she was unranked. She hasn't played in any of the majors in quite some time, similar to Rafael Nadal, and we talked about that on Monday, him losing to Alexander Zverev. Was that fair for Nadal to get Zverev? And I'm not trying to say he had to, I'm not trying to say that Nadal had to go up against some scrub, but at least ease him into the tournament. Maybe if he faces Zverev in the third round, all right, fine. Right out of the gate, boom, bam, that's it. And same for Osaka. She won her first round on Monday, and then yesterday had to face Świątek. And to think she had Świątek on the ropes. She was down 5-2 in the third set before coming back to win 7-5. And could you imagine if Osaka would have beaten Świątek there, who has won back-to-back French Opens in 3 of the last 4? That would have been a huge story. And who knows how much gas in the tank Osaka would have had to maybe even get into the weekend and possibly next week. But that's a good sign for Osaka. Maybe for her, if she's going to go play at the Old England Club next month at Wimbledon, I would think she would look at what happened yesterday as some momentum and even some confidence to think that, hey, all right, kind of back here. I had my baby. I understand she still may be dealing with some mental health issues, but this is a good time for her. So maybe having that match with Świątek will add a little passion and some fire into her to maybe carry that into Wimbledon if she is going to participate there. And I would think she would based on what happened yesterday. But Świątek, boy, not only had a huge scare, but an enormous one. And that would have been and would have had a wide open women's draw for the rest of the tournament if Świątek would have lost yesterday. Because on the men's side, we talked about this on Monday, it is wide open to begin with, or even on Thursday's podcast last week. So for Świątek, she survives, and the men's side, everything is status quo other than Nadal, as we know. But you still have Djokovic, who has had mixed results in his first match, and Alcaraz, I believe, is going to perform today. If I'm not mistaken, I thought I saw that earlier. But for the French Open, let's see what happens from now until the weekend. We'll pick it up on Monday where the second week will begin. And let's see if we'll have any upsets or any big-time matches here to report come Monday. And then finally, to round it all off, I know UFC, and I usually don't forecast this ahead of time, but I know that Dustin Poirier has a match here on Saturday night. And I know some of the talk has been about the comeback of Conor McGregor. And even though Poirier shot that down, saying that that ship has passed, about maybe a fourth match with he and McGregor somewhere down the road. And who knows, if the money's going to be right, Poirier could say all he wants right now. But if McGregor in their camp, or if Dana White says, hey, we'll give you X amount of money to have another go at it between he and Conor McGregor, I'm sure Poirier, that's going to be tough for him to pass up. But I digress. He has a match here for the lightweight championship on Saturday. And let me see if I can pronounce his name, people. Islam Makhachev, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Now, Makhachev is 25-1, where Poirier is 30-6, but we know Poirier is a beast when it comes to what he's done throughout the course of his career. And Makhachev, I couldn't even tell you who he fought previously, but this, I would think, would be a step up for him. And we'll see what happens. Will I be in tune to this? I think I will, because Poirier, I know he's a big name in the sport. And who knows if there could be a clash at somewhere down the road or at some point down the road between he and McGregor. So that I'll keep my antenna up. So we shall see. UFC Saturday night. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be geeked up for that to see how Makhachev will go up against Poirier. And that's all I'll say about that. But I'll put it on people's radar and we'll revisit that on Monday to see what will happen there in the Octagon Saturday night, which I believe is in Vegas. Usually those big fights do take place there, but they are all over the place. In fact, I should check that out right now before I bid adieu. But there you have it, though, people. That'll do it. We'll talk about that on Monday. It doesn't matter. It could be on the moon for all I know, but the match will still take place. Once again, I thank each and every one of you for stopping by to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. It's another podcast. Put the lid on that as we get to the month of June. If you are unaware, I know I mentioned it at the top, but I have to repeat it one more time. Please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, write a review on whichever podcast platform you listen to, Apple, Spotify, the website, JAYREELZ.com. Of course, the YouTube channel. I know I've been saying this for quite some time. Just be on the lookout as I'll put some shorts on what's happening in the world of sports. I have a vlog that's on deck. I know I've been babbling about that, and I know with the way things have gone recently, but I do have something in the works to hopefully have up for you guys and gals Sunday morning, which details something that has to do with my journey, not only just in podcasting, but even in broadcasting and being a talk show host. So you definitely do not want to miss that. So I have that in the works. So stay tuned to my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ for the latest when it comes to that. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. Whatever you want to send me, I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports since birth, sharing nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.